hasn't Kim Jong Un responded to your request to have a conversation?
How do you know he hasn't responded?
Has he?
Yeah, he has.
Is President Trump snubbing South Korea to reignite his friendly relationship with Kim Jong Un? The United States and South Korea have been close military partners since the 1950s, the days of the Korean War. It's a relationship that has been upheld by Republican and Democratic presidents alike for decades. But on Sunday, President Trump announced that the U.S. will substantially reduce joint military exercises with South Korea. He seems to be referring to this program taking place this week known as Ulchi Freedom Shield. And one reason Trump cited for doing this all was his very good relationship with North Korea's leader, Kim Jong Un. Trump also suggested that South Korea's been a freeloader and unwilling to help the U.S. in its war with Iran. Is Donald Trump turning his back on a decades-old agreement? And could this set up a new nuclear arms race in another part of the world? Stick with us. From the BBC, I'm Asma Khalid in Washington, D.C. And welcome to The Global Story on YouTube. Jake Kwon, welcome back to The Global Story. It's been a while since we've had you on, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
The U.S. and South Korea, these two nations, began active military cooperation during the Korean War in the 1950s, and they've had a formal military alliance since then. Jake, can you briefly explain why the U.S. and South Korea have had this long history of joint military drills?
You know, we have to go back to 1950 when South Korea was invaded by North Korean forces.
North Koreans launched a full-scale, well-prepared drive on the capital of the South, Seoul. The peaceful southern democracy was taken by surprise by this communist blitzkrieg.
You know, South Koreans were essentially caught with their pants down.
The United States, in a swift, bold decision, has already gone into action. Air power first, with cover and support for South Korea.
The American troops had left the peninsula and they had to come back and, pretty much save the South Koreans, and then they pushed back up. And since then, South Korea has always demanded that that the U.S. station its troops here, and they have been keeping, anywhere, between the current number, 27,000, and up to whatever number, and they have always been called the tripwire. So if North Koreans or other forces would invade South Korea, they would have to attack the U.S. base here, and then it would guarantee that Americans would join the war. And this always has been an anxiety on the South Korean part, that if something happens, Americans will walk away instead of helping the South Koreans. And this is why, for many decades, South Koreans have demanded that the U.S. keep their troops. And this
Keep the troops stationed inside South Korea for that reason, to prevent deterrence, essentially.
Yes, for deterrence. And part of the package is that Americans are going to offer what is called a nuclear umbrella. And the contract here is that South Korea do not go and develop your own nuclear weapons, because Americans will come and use their nuclear weapons to deter any invaders possible in the area. If you look at South Korea's neighbors who, like North Korea, China, Russia, they all have nuclear weapons. So South Korea feels like without that American help, it is very much of a power imbalance here in the country.
And in terms of the specific military exercises that were discussed last week, that Ulchi, let me get the name correct, that Ulchi Freedom Shield, what were they intending to practice for, the South Koreans and the Americans? What was that directed towards?
Well, first of all, I think that's a very good pronunciation. And, this is a two-part, military exercise. Uchi is actually the civilian part, where the government, civil servants, they prepare for any kind of situation, like terrorism, a war situation, evacuation, that kind of stuff. And then the Freedom Shield is the joint military, the drill that has been held every summer, nearly every summer, for many, many years now. And this is where South Korean and the American troops, as well as this time there will be a dozen, these UN military forces joining as well, where they, practice what to do in case of an invasion.
And just to be clear, Jake, for those of us who may not be extraordinarily familiar with military drills and training, what do they actually do? I mean, are they out there physically shooting targets together? Are these computer simulations? Do we know what they look like?
Yeah, majority, most of it is computer simulation, called
Okay.
wargaming. This is, most of it is done inside a room with computers. They simulate, troop movement, etc. And very small part of it is going to be actual troop movement, which is called FTX or field training exercise. And
And this happens every year, this exercise in particular that we're talking about.
certainly, and there has been a tendency to kind of reduce the size of the field part, where
Okay.
actually there's a troop movement, and a lot of that was done to help with, the peace process and dialogue with the North Koreans.
Jake, as you've alluded to, North Korea is not a fan of these drills and has not been a fan historically and seems to act out every year when they're about to take place.
Yes, and just a few days before Mr. Trump's post, they, put out a statement saying that, calling this another invasion practice. We heard the same kind of statement we heard before, where they said they'll exercise their right to defend themselves, which is always kind of ominous to hear. And then they also fired off a few ballistic missiles, which is against the UN, security resolution. And it's usually seen as a protest to this exercise happening. And I think what was interesting about President Trump's post is that he called this exercise hostile and inappropriate. And this is the kind of language we actually heard from North Koreans and never from a US president before.
We've seen Donald Trump say that he wants the United States to substantially reduce military exercises with South Korea. At this point, Jake, what does substantially reduce mean? Here in Washington, I don't know that we've gotten a whole lot of clarity on what that means.
And in South Korea, we haven't got a whole lot of clarity as well. I mean, we asked the defense ministry immediately whether there will be reduction or even cancellation. And they said, no, it's proceeding as planned, was their
Ah,
very
okay.
brief answer. Uh, it appears to us that this was a surprise to South Koreans. It was a surprise to perhaps even their own American military, because until this post came up, we haven't seen any evidence of substantial changes. I mean, there has been a reduction of the field training portion of it, but this has been a long time kind of coming changes. And these training exercises are planned months in advance. There's a lot that goes into planning of this. So, we haven't seen any evidence.
When President Trump made this announcement, he did not only point to North Korea. That was not the only context in which he was making this decision, he says. He also mentioned that South Korea had declined to join his war against Iran as one of the reasons for this decision. And I think it's worth contextualizing this for listeners. This is not the first time that we've seen the American president turn against an ally who he feels has not been pulling their weight. We've heard a lot of criticism of Europe. In March, President Trump described Spain as a terrible partner over the Iran war.
But some of the European, like Spain, has been terrible. In fact, I told Scott to cut off all dealings with Spain.
In that same month, he also told reporters he was not happy with the UK over its response to the Iran war. A month later, Trump said he was considering troop cuts in Germany after a disagreement with the German chancellor. This also relates to the war in Iran. What has South Korea's position actually been when it comes to the war in Iran?
Well, South Korea has been quite consistent in that they have not heard any formal request to join this military action or any kind of action in the Strait of Hormuz from the Americans. Uh, I think the formal is the key word there because we have seen the social media post from President Trump, calling on South Korea, Japan, Philippines to bring their navy over to help with Americans. And we also heard from President Trump, in the White House just recently saying that he had a call with South Korea's president where he made the request, but he was told no, thank you, according to his own words. But we haven't seen any phone call. In fact, South Korea's presidential office denied that there had been any recent phone calls. They said the last time the two leaders talked over the phone was in May. So maybe this was discussed back then, but this is actually all quite new to us.
What is the sense in South Korea of why the American president might be raising this issue now about Iran in this moment? The war, of course, has now been going on for more than 5 months.
I think the kind of hopeful reading of this is that President Trump is not getting what he was looking for from Iran. He's not looking for he hasn't gotten that victory, the easy win. So he is kind of pivoting to North Korea, where he could possibly gain some kind of concession or get some kind of peace talks, that this could be used come midterms during the election. He could claim this as a win. He's already claimed that he had brought peace to multiple conflicts around the world. And, if he somehow negotiates another meeting with Kim Jong Un, this could be a good kind of a photo opportunity as well. But I think
Mm.
there is also this narrative in Washington, D.C., that South Korea has not been a good ally. President
Mm.
Trump has voiced his dissatisfaction with South Korea before in the first term as well as second term, where he think of South Korea as a freeloader. Americans provide protection, stationing tens of thousands of troops there, but what is America getting out of it is his view. He also believes that America has been ripped off by these very strong economies around the world. He sees South Korea as a very rich country that hasn't done much to contribute back to Americans. And I think Mr. Trump spelled it out. He said that South Korea gets a lot of oil, gas from the Strait of Hormuz. It is in South Korea's interest to, open up that strait as well. South Korea does have navy, right, frigates as well as other ships that could potentially come to aid in, escorting some of these vessels through the strait. So where is it? Why isn't it coming? Why isn't it helping out? But from South Korea's perspective, the whole South Korea's diplomacy is somewhat mercantile in that South Korea, their default position is that they want to keep a good relationship with everybody because South Korea will eventually make some deal with them, whether that's trade or some kind of cooperation. South Korea can sell its product. There's a reason South Korean passport is one of the strongest in the world because it doesn't really have enemies, right? And they are looking at a future where the Iran issue is over and South Korea will re-engage in trade with Iran. And they don't want to make an enemy out of, a regional power.
So far in this conversation, we have talked extensively about President Trump's shifting relationship with South Korea and South Korea's leaders. But we have not really dug into his relationship with North Korea's leader, Kim Jong Un. Uh, Trump has said he has a very good relationship with the leader of North Korea, and he has been posting quite a bit on social media in the last couple of days. In fact, on Monday evening, we saw this meme of Kim Jong Un on the phone with the message, "Hey, Donald, we cool, right?"
I cannot imagine that going down well in Pyongyang, to be honest, because
Really?
over there, it is unthinkable to put your leader in a meme or make any light of him. Uh, but but because this is American president, maybe it will go okay.
Um, Many of us, I think, will remember that during President Trump's first term, he had this, some would say, lofty goal of trying to get North Korea to denuclearize. He met with the country's leader face to face 3 times. But in terms of policies, did anything significantly change between the US and North Korea's relationship after those visits during Trump's first term?
I think one thing we can credit Mr. Trump with is that he broke a lot of tradition. It was unthinkable before him that an American sitting president would meet with North Korea's leader. And this is exactly what happened in 2018. The two leaders met in Singapore. And I remember it was like every media organization in the world had descended upon that city state. The two leaders, walked towards each other
Mm.
on that kind of red carpet. And when they shook hands, it was like electricity. And I still remember all my hair in the back of my head kind of standing up looking at that image.
Oh, wow.
And it was a historic moment. But like the substance of that meeting, the agreement that came after was more kind of, more abstract. But it was said that this is a preliminary kind of agreement. They'll meet again, and then that's where they will really come up with some practical changes.
So that was that first historic meeting. And then the next year, we see Kim Jong Un and President Trump meet again.
Yes, the second time they met was in Hanoi, Vietnam.
I want to just say it's an honor to be with Chairman Kim. It's an honor to be together.
And I remember being there, very excited. Even the Vietnamese people were very excited.
In really a country, Vietnam, where they've really rolled out the red carpet, and they're very honored to have us.
They made cupcakes with the two leaders' faces and ending it out. I remember that one. But that luncheon that they were supposed to have was never eaten. Something had happened after that first meeting where the two sides just could not close the gap. And this is the danger of when, when they do top-down diplomacy, when the two leaders meet without the agreement already worked out on a lower level. So President Trump walked away, as he said, because the deal wasn't good enough. And North Korean leader had to go home without anything to show for. This was a multi-day train trip, and I could just imagine the air in that train as this supreme leader who's supposed to be infallible, who will never make a mistake, going home without a victory.
And this was in the winter of 2019, if I recall correctly. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
it was. And some of the North Korean officials who were at the forefront of that negotiation has disappeared since that meeting and just never to be seen again. Because, I think this was a moment where Kim Jong Un felt more embarrassed than ever in his life. And I think he laid some of the blame on the South Koreans who were playing mediator in that whole event. So, a few years down the line, North Korea is declaring South Korea not even part of our blood. There will never be a reunification with the South. We will treat them as just strangers. And there was a surprise meeting with Kim Jong Un the same year, later that year, in the Panmunjom. This is where the North and South Korea shares a border. This is where the two sides usually meet for diplomacy. And President Trump, there's another iconic image of him meeting Kim Jong Un right at the border, and then they hold hands and walk over the border, the concrete that signifies the border, and then North Korean leader takes Donald Trump to North Korean side for several steps. And this was kind of very unthinkable, another very much a TV moment, wasn't it? And then nothing much really happened. They kind of just talk about seeing each other again. It didn't really come to an agreement. And that's the last time the two leaders actually met face to face.
And here we are. And as a result of those meetings, we have not seen North Korea denuclearize. In fact, it seems, according to experts, that North Korea now has more nuclear weapons. Is it around 50 or 60 nuclear warheads?
Yes, and they probably have the material, I think the best understanding, to make another 30 warheads. On top of that, they have expanded their uranium enrichment facility. That is our best understanding, according to the satellite images. And I think what makes North Koreans even more threatening, unlike what President Trump has said, is that they have been sending troops to Russia to fight the Ukrainians there. And they have been learning exactly how to fight in the cutting edge modern warfare, modern battlefield tactics. They have been losing thousands of soldiers there, really learning how to fight with drones. And this kind of feeds back to the Ulchi Freedom Shield training, because we've been told that this training will incorporate some of those understanding that North Koreans have now learned how to fight in a drone warfare. So they will be practicing how to counter drone warfare as well as cyber warfare that North Koreans are getting dangerously good at.
President Trump's decision to scale back on military drills with South Korea is landing in the same week that South Korea's leader has reportedly proposed talks with North Korea with the aim of ending tensions between those two neighboring countries. And it sounds like South Korea might want to take a more conciliatory stance towards its neighbor. So I guess my question is this decision by the Trump administration to scale back on joint military drills necessarily a bad idea from the view of South Korea?
I think South Korean response to this has been more muted and quite ambivalent. And it's a bit of a mixed message, right? Because on one hand, South Koreans are concerned that this is almost seen as Mr. Trump punishing South Korea in the favor of North Korea. But this is actually
Mm.
exactly what South Korea has wanted him to do, to shift his focus back to the Korean Peninsula issue. And the Korean War, I mean, sometimes we call it the forgotten war because in the American consciousness, it is largely forgotten, but
Mm.
there has never been a peace treaty. So, this war technically has been continuing for 7 decades plus.
Mm.
And this is there has been kind of all this renewed calls, especially now that South Korea has a kind of more conciliatory government in South Korea who wants to resume the talks with North Korea. This message from President Trump, it's not necessarily something that Seoul doesn't want to hear, and I think that's a more kind of hopeful reading of this post he made.
If you adopt the more hopeful interpretation, what could this actually mean for South Korea's relationship with North Korea?
I think if President Trump diverts his attention back on the peninsula issue, perhaps there could be renewed peace talks. There's always that danger of the two Koreas not talking, and then a small kind of clash escalating into something we do not want to see. And this has always been the danger of not talking between the two countries and not talking between North Korea and the United States. And South Korean leader has always kind of nudged him. When Lee Jae-myung, president, visited the Oval Office,
Mm.
the
Mhm.
first topic he brought up, please engage North Korea. And, we will call you the peacemaker.
There was quite a
We
bit of flattery in that meeting, as I recall.
Exactly. He talked about how beautiful the Oval Office looked after the renovation. I think he may have said, like, congratulations on making America great again. Later when President Trump visited South Korea for the APEC meeting,
Mm.
he even gave him a golden crown, right? So there's a lot of flattery going on from the South
Mhm.
Koreans. And in a way, President Trump is doing exactly what South Korea has been asking him to do, just not the exact way South Korea had imagined.
That's what I was gonna ask you. I mean, it sounds like you're saying South Korea wants the United States, wants the Trump administration to turn its focus back to the Korean Peninsula, to try to engage with North Korea. But in doing so, what we see is the Trump administration, at this point at least, backing away from this long-standing military arrangement that it's had. And my question, Jake, is what does that mean? I mean, if the United States were to step back militarily from supporting South Korea, I imagine that would have huge ripple effects. As you described at the outset, the entire military agreement is based on the United States keeping its word. And in this instance, it appears the United States is not keeping its commitment.
Look, best case scenario, Pyongyang is overjoyed and they do come to the negotiation table. We have peace and negotiation, we have peace, and everyone's happy. Not so good scenario is that North Korea does not come to the negotiation table. They're actually quite busy right now participating in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, making billions of dollars and sending weapons and troops there. And, they're being celebrated by Chinese leadership and Russian leadership. Why do they really need Americans? And in that case, have Americans lowered their commitment and really lowered the confidence that Asian allies have in America about deterrence, about giving aids and protection. And in that case, if South Korea no longer can rely on America to come to its aid, then what's next step? We just heard South Korea's president talk again about self-reliance in defense matters. Although this is something that has been said before, at this moment, it kind of feels different to hear South Korea talk about going its own way and being strong on its own and having their own deterrence. And I think there is this risk that we hear from experts that essentially it is nudging, Asian allies to seek their own nuclear weapons. Because
Mm.
having South Korea's own indigenous nuclear bomb is quite a popular proposition amongst the general public. It
Mm.
appeals to South Korea's sense of nationalism. It appeals to South Korean sense of independence. And the dynamic here is always South Korea's politicians and leadership kind of convincing the general public that nuclear weapon is not a good idea, that South Korea should continue to rely on Americans for that. But if the calculation changes, and if there is, if the politicians here smell voters are pushing in a certain way, I don't think it is completely off the table in the future. And I think that is the danger of an arms race in the region.
Well, Jake, it's always good to have you on the show. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you for having me.
And folks, that's it for The Global Story on YouTube today. Thanks for spending some time with us. And if you liked what you saw today, then I should recommend checking out The Global Story as an audio podcast. You can find more from us every weekday on bbc.com or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.